Welcome to a Real Business of Wine session on a subject that is probably one of the most complex in the wine world. We talk about appellations, we talk about grapes, and we talk about winemaking and so on. But there is that question of what is a fine wine and what is a luxury wine? Is a fine wine that's not very expensive a luxury? Is a wine, because it's expensive and luxurious, necessarily fine? And some producers actually dislike the concept of having a wine called a luxury. Other people think that all wine by definition is a luxury, because who needs wine really? So tonight we've got Pauline Vicard, who is on her way to being a master of wine, or going through all of those phases to being a master of wine. And one of the areas that she, as part of ARENI Global, has focused on doing a lot of research on is that question of luxury. And Pauline is going to introduce our guest this evening, Maggie Henríquez, who I've met several times over the years, who, apart from running Krug, has actually taken, also welcome again, Maggie.
Welcome.
Has also taken an academic interest in the question of luxury. So Pauline, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce Maggie.
Thank you so much, Robert, and hi, good evening, good morning, everyone. I'm super excited to do that topic and to explore that topic in collaboration with the Real Business of Wine, because there's as Robert mentioned, the real complexity of how luxury and fine wine intersect. Do they mean the same thing? I mean, we do have a Master of Wine paper. It's called fine wine a luxury, or is there something as luxury wine? So that's something that really intersects with loads of notions, cultural, marketing, brand, routes to market, behavior. There's so much to explore with that. And I'm super happy to have with us tonight Maggie Henríquez, who's the head of Krug. And Maggie started this conversation with us at ARENI Global 2 years ago, when we had our second think tank in Champagne. And we started this conversation with Maggie, with Henriquez from the New York Times, and also with a sociologist that had a very different approach to what luxury was. And Maggie is one of those super inspiring women that not only she heads one of the most successful champagne brand, but she's also doing a PhD in her free time. And she's done a PhD on luxury and on how it can relate to wine and how marketing can work or not. She's going to explain a bit more. But the first question that I would like to ask you, Maggie, on this is, I think we're going to touch on tonight that it all comes down to definition. What do you mean by luxury? What do you mean by fine wine? What's the definition of luxury that you went for in your thesis that you're going to present in a couple of weeks now?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. Yes, as a matter of fact, I did the PhD in business. It's the Swiss Management Center. It's a chapter of Argentina. I used to live there in the years 2000 to 2009. And so I did the PhD there, and then I had to present the thesis in 2009. But in January 2009, I was asked to come to France to lead Krug, and it was not an easy task. The first years were quite complicated. So I asked the university to give me the maximum time to present the final work. And they gave me until the end of 2019. And I presented on time, perfectly on time. And I had the approval of the professor, of the supervisor. And finally, the 3 judges also approved it without comments, which apparently is very good. And I have to defend the thesis, and it's going to be for the first time accepted in Zoom because of not traveling. And it's going to be in 2 weeks. It's at the 20th. And the subject, because in PhD you have to push the limits of knowledge, or what is known, to have a project that is accepted. So I had been, since I arrived in France, I was always very seduced by the whole luxury concept. And I started understanding it very well, or trying to understand it as much as possible. As a matter of fact, I got very much inspired to run all the strategy behind Krug in all the fundamentals of luxury brand building. And interesting enough, it was something that I was always seduced with, and I kept on studying. And the more I studied, at the same time, the more I was learning about wines. And my thesis said it's about all these theories, the theories that are behind the brand building. They fail to explain the fine wines, or what people call luxury wines. So interesting enough, these theories that can be and can apply more to champagne, because champagne behaves more like brands. It's very different, and as a matter of fact, I deliberately took champagne out, and I explained why, which is very interesting because for me, it was important to validate my hypothesis, because to say the luxury, all the luxury theories, but this is not me assuming what luxury is. Luxury has been growing enormously in the last 25 to 30 years. There's a lot of writers and very strong writers that have written. There's a lot of literature about it. And to do this thesis, I had to work on the history of wine, on the history of luxury, that has taken many different forms in different steps in history. And today is in the form of brands, and this is what luxury is. And there is a lot of theories in the building of a luxury brand that if you try to apply them to what is considered a luxury wine, you see that there's really very little in common. Of course, when you see the characteristic, you see a very good qualitative product, very highly respected product. You see a very rare product, highly priced. So the characteristic of them are similar, but the way they have been built, or the arguments, or the elements that have to be considered for it to be built are very different. And what I did to support these was to go in 23 different domains. In between, the thesis is based in Burgundy and Bordeaux. And so I went into, research, 23 different domains to ask and explore what the main elements of their strategy and how they have built what they have in front of them. And it's very interesting because we can have some conclusions. Of course, to get to final conclusions, we should go in further research. But I consider that the hypothesis was validated. And now, what is luxury? And as in your question, what is luxury for me? Which is a little different of all the theories behind luxury brand building. What is luxury? For me, luxury, and it's a definition that I invented and I put together. And I always say luxury is a light that enlightens the path for others. So the key is to keep this light on. So if you ever came with an idea that didn't exist and you are bringing something new that has a very high quality, and it brings something that others don't have, you are bringing something that can be called luxury. And then is how you keep this light on. And if you see the greatest wines in the world, the ones we call luxury wines, finally, they are guiding the path for all of the wines around the world. And this is why I said that I gave to justify the subject of the thesis, saying the industry is so big that it's so important that these houses are well understood for others to follow, and others to follow at the end will help an industry to get better.
So like luxury for you is being that beacon of light. Do you have a difference for you in your approach in a luxury wine and a fine wine? Is there a difference in your personal definition of that, or is it the same?
I would say in my mind, because finally there is no definition. It's like prestige, there is no definition, you see. I would say that when we refer to luxury wine, and unfortunately the word luxury is too much, is badly used and is too used. But let's try to extract from this overutilization of the word. The word luxury for me would mean all these very top guiding lights in the world of wines, wherever they are. They may be in Spain, they may be in Italy, some of them, they are France, they are wherever they are, and they were able to really bring something absolutely unique that creates this light. They are, for me, the luxury wines. And then you have a larger universe of fine wine, which I understand as good, very good wines. But probably when we just come to this luxury concept, that you could say, instead of calling them luxury, you could call them the greatest wines,
with maybe
Aubert de Vilaine, because I interviewed him, of course, in my thesis. He said, I don't want to be luxury brand, not at all. I am happy if I make a good wine. Well, I would say great wine.
So that's
Could I just
yeah.
Sorry, Maggie, I've just got one question, and listening to you very carefully there, there's one thing that followed through your thread was all of the places that you listed were in Europe. And one of the arguments that comes up over luxury is how much history does a luxury product have to have? So, for example, tomorrow evening, 67 Pall Mall is doing a tasting with Bill Harlan. Harlan Estate has been going a fair while. Screaming Eagle has been going a little less time.
Yeah.
And I think we could probably name a younger wine, all of which in a US context
in Napa
might be considered as luxuries. How do you look at it? How do you look at that?
Of course. And if we talk about Harlan, for instance, I tell you a little story that is very beautiful. One day, years ago already, I was in California, and I was in a house, and Bill was there. And it was the first time I met Bill, who we have a very, very strong relationship today. And so he was there, and I have great admiration for what he's done. And I presented the case of Krug. And what we did in Krug was exactly going back, reconnect to our roots, which is a fundamental thing to do when we talk about building a luxury brand. And I remember saying, you see, Joseph Krug had this vision, and he just founded a house with a different approach to champagne making because he had a different vision, he had a different objective. And he left everything written to assure perpetuity in this little book that we found in April 2010. And I said to Bill, when are you going to write this book? Because you need to leave your vision for perpetuity, for the future. So in probably 150 years, somebody can find your vision, which is so extremely important when we talk about a luxury house. And it was very emotional moment, and he cried and I cried, and it was great. And so I fully agree, when we talk about luxury, history, roots, and the founder is extremely important in the luxury brand building. There's no doubt about this. And you can be a younger house, but if you've been completely rooted, if you've been unique first and different, and you're proposing something that doesn't exist, and you are fully coherent, you can feel the elements of a luxury brand.
And how about culture? Yeah, thanks. How about culture then? Because what I found in some of the discussions that we had, with you, with Eric Asimov, or with, sociologists like Beverly Skeggs, is that luxury is deeply rooted into cultural practice. So
Absolutely.
Even more than history, what you consider culture, what you consider important. So again, going back to the question of Robert, is there a difference in how luxury was perceived in the old world versus the new world, or how did you manage that element of the cultural differences and perception?
Oh, yes, of course. I would go even further. I would say that everyone will translate luxury differently. I mean, it's very differently perceived everywhere. And so what we do is we can, you know, kind of rely when we're going to define, or look for the characteristics of the way or the luxury brand building theories. Then you go into the different authors that have written about it, and you can bring some theories behind the luxury brand building. But what luxury is has changed. As a matter of fact, luxury and wine, they are both from the origin of humanity. Wines, they were there, the vineyards were there to be discovered. So they just get confused with the beginning of humanity, and luxury too, because luxury was the way, since the organization exists, you have luxury, because it's the way at the beginning of history, the way people showed their hierarchy, etc. And it has taken different forms, if it's in the Romans or the Greeks. And so it's been changing and evolving. And in the last, I would say 50, 70 years, luxury is turned, or has been translated as brands. And we see them today as brands. And the word of luxury has grown significantly. And you can also see that luxury is changing. And it will continue to evolve and change. And people are demanding today from luxury houses things that they were not asking 10 or 20 years ago or 15 years ago. I mean, people are asking for these companies to be good. People are asking these companies to take care of the planet. This was never the case 10 years ago. So this will continue to evolve. It's the same case with wines. We will not be able to talk about luxury wines, great wines, if we are not absolutely totally committed to the planet and the way we treat our vineyards. You know, it's part of the evolution, which I think is very healthy, as a matter of fact.
So this is a really good segue to one of the audience questions. Nicole, I'm going to bring you in to ask this, if I may, please. Nicole, you had some questions about sustainability and some of the work that Maggie and the whole team have done. Can I ask you to ask those on air?
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan of Maggie's, and I'm a huge fan of the work that she's been doing at Krug and more generally from White Hennessy. And so I was so delighted to see this amazing program that she and her team put on at Wine Paris for the Living Soils program, and the stewardship and the leadership that the company has been taking in the area of sustainability, and how that is implied to be an important part of luxury brands. So in the case of wine in particular, I guess I'd be very interested to know how, Maggie, you're feeling about the next chapter in the post-COVID era, in whether sustainability will be still front and center, with the notion of luxury goods being, you know, good for you, good for the planet, or if you think that there's another stage that might be changing, or do you think it'll just be going deeper in that area?
Yeah, hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for your words. Very kind. You know, I believe, and I'm profoundly convinced that if we saw trends in the past, and it's part of the conclusions of my thesis, that there would not be possible to be one of these greatest wines, of luxury wines, if there is not a very strong commitment with nature. As a matter of fact, just as an example, you see Chateau Palmer, you know, in Bordeaux, there's this classification, you know, 55 classification, and you can see pricing is very much attached to that level of classification, and they are not third classification, but in price they are very close to first because of what they have done in biodynamics, etc., etc. Very interesting. So I believe that if in the past we all knew that the trends were there, and the request of very strong sustainable development approach to anything that has to be with wine was required. I believe that after COVID, this is going to be even stronger. We all say that things are changing and things may be changing. You have seen, as everyone, the impact that this stop that has many tough things and many good things. But when we talk about the planet and when we talk about what is going on in the reduction of pollution, this is amazing. I cannot imagine that there is anyone who is not looking at this in a very, very serious way. And so I believe if that was a trend and it was happening, now it's going to be a much, much stronger reality. There's no way this is going to be different.
If I can jump in on this as well, one of the things that we've been seeing, looking, reading, hearing through the different roundtables that we've been doing in April is that the definition of luxury is also shifting. Like every big economic change changed the definition of luxury. Like the landscape that we are in was built by the economic crisis of 2008, when luxury in a popular understanding was before having things, buying things, and having those material things around you. After 2008, it shifted from having to doing, and everything then focused on experience and spending money on things that you do to be a better version of yourself. One of the things that I'm wondering is that if after COVID, that notion of luxury is not going to go a step further. I mean, we're all clapping for our carers. On Thursday in London, you might hear people clapping tonight. But are we going to shift from doing to helping? And are brands like luxury brands going to be responsible or expected to help people be the best version of themselves and really be there for their community as a symbol of luxury?
Pauline, for me, it's absolutely clear. There are two axes that are going to be absolutely a request in any luxury house. And one is to do good to people. What is what you're going to do good to people? And this is of your product. It's really, going beyond to do good and taking care of the planet. So you have to do both, you see? For me,
so can I just jump in? Because I think what you've just said actually is a perfect introduction to a question from Ellen McCoy. Can we bring Ellen up, Polly, please? Ellen McCoy from Bloomberg. And Ellen, if I can just unmute you, go ahead, Ellen, with your question, please. Ellen?
She's still muted on my screen.
Am I on then?
Okay. Yes, you're fine.
So my question is really about intention and whether a winery can consciously create a luxury wine. Should it think about a luxury wine that way, or is it really consumers who sort of anoint a wine, who sort of determine whether a wine is, quote, luxury or not?
Yeah, very, very interesting, because at the end, what happens is what you said at the end. And this is why we say luxury is at the end very different for everyone. I don't think anyone would go and say, I want to make a luxury wine. I don't think that this exists. As a matter of fact, when we come into what makes, because people have used the luxury to classify wines. And I was always quite bothered, because when you go and see the theories in the brand building, they are very, very different to what they are used in building a great wine. But let's say, I believe that nobody is going to say, I'm going to build a luxury brand in wine. I think people say, I'm going to make great wine, and I'm going to take care of all the different steps, which are extremely different than all the theories for the brand building. And this starts by the terroir, by understanding what is the kind of cepage and type of grape, and how you can express that terroir in the best possible way. And so finally, when you have a grower or responsible for a property that has this vision, this ambition, and you have, you know, cases, Philippe Pascal in Burgundy, 20 years ago in Givry, and you see he says today, 20 years after, he says, and now I understand what to do. And this is the first thing that differentiates profoundly the luxury brands from the wines, is time. It's once a year that you have the experience. And there's no way in these 20 years you have the whole luxury brand world that has been transformed, that has grown and has multiplied. And it was the time for Philippe Pascal to just decide exactly what he wants to do. And so in wine, time is extremely much longer. So I believe that people have the commitment, this passion for making something absolutely outstanding and unique. And then they have the patience and the engagement not to let this go, because we talk about something related to nature, and nature we don't control. And when you talk about luxury, there is something that is called the value chain, is totally controlled, totally. And this doesn't exist. So this is why when we talk about luxury, what we are saying is great wine. Do we use the word luxury or not? I say, if we want to use that word, we have to change the way to build it. You know, what is behind the building of a luxury wine. But Ellen, for me, nobody thinks about this. People think about creating a great expression of the terroir they have discovered. They dream has something special to give. And then it's the consumer who recognizes the beauty of them. And then the prestige and the renown and the consideration comes out from the market, of course.
Pauline, you've got a question from Eric Asimov, I think.
Well, the question, because, you know, Eric was part of that discussion and he wrote a lot about luxury. And again, starting from this point that luxury means different things to different culture. Us in romantic countries like France and Italy, we've got that notion of luxury being focused on, you know, not practical solution, but really creating what's extraordinary. And so in this, it relates to what Maggie just said about, you know, a producer doesn't think about luxury, he thinks about being all in and doing whatever it takes to produce the best with what is he or she is given. But Eric was saying that it actually doesn't really matter what it means for him as an American. The meaning is more, you know, about extravagance, exclusion, exclusivity, and almost like something, yes, that it is made to exclude people and push them out. And his words was, it doesn't really matter what it means, what it connotes to people. And by connoting wine with luxury, we're actually doing it a disservice, because it means exclusion when wine
Exactly.
should be inclusivity and wine should be bringing people in.
I couldn't
so how
agree
do you
more.
balance that?
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more, because my point is, either you change the perception of that word because you give another meaning, or you just give another name. As a matter of fact, this is the thesis about, because yes, there are plenty of different considerations, but when we go to theory, you know, you go to all books, all what is being written, there is nothing that defines luxury as this exclusion, etc. There is a lot of other definitions behind, but the truth is that all that defines a luxury brand is really does not explain what a greatest wine is. And so we are talking about the same. I think this luxury wine puts a distance and makes it, you know, very far because the explanation of how to make what a luxury wine should be is not completely understood. Do I explain
Maggie,
myself?
can I just say that
yeah,
absolutely. But I wonder whether the fact that you're in the champagne business also, we're talking about wine in general, but champagne I think is unique. I was in a bar in Shanghai where there were some people in a Dom Perignon section drinking Dom Perignon with sparklers and so on, with no interest in vintage or anything else. It was a bar. On the same night in Shanghai, Richard Geoffroy was giving a tasting of Dom Perignon, explaining the blends and the vintages. And I honestly believe that some of the people who were in the bar on a different night would have been listening to Richard and vice versa. It's the same product. It's a luxury in both contexts. And I think that's a very complicated thing, which is maybe more specific to champagne than wine.
What is different is in champagne, because you have a different dimension, because the Champagne region has given the opportunity for champagne to be a blend. And so you can go to different areas, and it is not about the terroir. This is, I would say that there is a difference between the champagne approach and the wine approach. So it's very hard to see a wine selling a number of bottles that you can see great champagne selling. It's very, very strange. It's very hard to have it. So champagne in general, since its birth, you know, because they were negociants and because they have the opportunity to blend, it's more, it has behaved more as brands than the case of wines. This is something that is a reality. Then in this evolution, of course, people are requesting more and more from these different champagne houses, and quality has been going up, and there is much more attention to all the details. And you see in the case of Krug, very interesting. This man, since he arrived, he just decided that he wanted to understand every little plot as one wine, because he needed to see them as terroir, because he wanted to create a very high qualitative champagne every year. And because of heterogeneity, he should pay attention to terroir. So he just made a different approach because he wanted to make a different product of a very high quality. You could call that luxury wine, but at the end, the way to create these products, the stages, the distribution, we don't do direct distribution. We don't really know our clients. The communication is so different. You can find more the brand approach in champagne that you can have in wine. But the reason, I think, is really the dimension, the size. And so with the size, you have a different approach because you don't have the size to invest in building or investing in communicating a brand, which is, it's very different from champagne to wine. But this doesn't take any value from one or the other. And in wine, you can also see people, and you can go to Shanghai again, if we want to go there, you can see people, you know, tasting a wine, really valuing the wine, understanding the beauty of behind that bottle. And you can see somebody having the wine just to show that they are having a fantastic bottle of Petrus. And they don't care, you see? So you can have a very similar approach. And this, for me, to judge this different approach is completely unacceptable. I mean, I think we have to accept that there are people who connect differently. And we are nobody to judge the way people connect to the products.
So that actually opens the door for a question from Colin Truto, who is in South Africa, I think. Talking about whether brands, so whether luxury has to be aspirational. I'm trying to get Colin's voice. Colin, can you hear us?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Robert, and thank you for the opportunity, Margaret and Pauline. Obviously, being in South Africa, we are very much faced with what they for many years have called the black diamonds, the growing market in the middle class. And when you look at the way specifically the whiskey brands have done in Soweto, is look at how to target that market. A beautiful story was out of this research that they find that, you know, where you and I might have a whiskey around the table and it's in our glass, they actually would share the cost of a bottle at the bar, 2 or 3 or 4 guys, but they want the bottle on the table because they want people to see what they're drinking. So Johnny Walker did a lot of work with that. So because you and my whiskey looks exactly the same when it's mixed with water or just on the rocks, but when there's a bottle of Johnny on the table, then people know exactly what I'm having. And the same for champagne amongst the ladies. So for me also, just I like the story about the fact that luxury can mean many things to many people, but I think in a lot of contexts, it really is, you know, for me, luxury is having a car if I don't have a car. And also in other products like Ferrari and Porsche, is an aspirational car to drive for a lot of people. So I think the new lifestyle of the world and everything being so global, there's definitely a different definition of what luxury could mean to people. For us in the wine world, it's aspirational to be compared to Mouton Rothschild or Chateau Margaux. But I do think the way that a lot of people see luxury could mean what their daily circumstance in life is.
Thank you, Colin.
Colin, can I just jump in on the tail end of that to something very specific to Krug, which is I often have people ask, who do I think is doing a fabulous job on social media? And my very first answer, which I see Pauline laughing about, is always Krug, that I think that Krug has really defined their tone, their voice, their audience, their imagery. So my follow-on question to what Colin's asking, that I hope all ties into a tidy answer, is how has social media changed the definition and the perception of luxury?
Well, it's very interesting because what at the beginning, and I remember this is not very long ago, when we started with the Krug ID, we started with all the digital universe. At that point, this was 2011, and it was considered that using digital for luxury was a very bad idea. As a matter of fact, it was really hardly used because they thought it was a thought at that time that it was to go too popular, you know? And with the time, and this is part of the evolution, it's been completely the opposite. And you have all the houses using social media today in different ways with different tones. And why? Because it's a new way of communicating. It's a new tool. It's like, you know, we go to the vineyards and you have today different ways to measure the stress of the plants. This is new techniques. Why are you not going to use them? And so I think this is communication is changed. It's no more television. It's about social media. And so if you want people to know who you are, and this is an enormous opportunity for the wines, because wines can tell the story through social media. It's something that is so much easier to communicate, to connect to your consumers and your people you want to connect to your interior life. It's a fantastic tool. You know that in the past it was very difficult and to get your stories being printed, or it was very tough for any house. Today it is much easier, and so what you have to do is to build a communication that is interesting and that gives to the consumer. It's not only they reading about you, it's what you give to others. And to find this good balance is not easy, but no doubt that social media today, it's a way to open the stories, and it's a great opportunity for all the wine industry, because I insist all the time, what people want to know is the stories behind the bottle, the human story behind the bottle. And then there are some human stories that are extremely challenging, that they aim for something that is so unique, first and different, that then you qualify them as luxury or you qualify them as great wines.
So to build on this, we also work with Toby Beckers, who's the founder of Becker's Wine in Australia, in McLaren Vale. And that ties in with the questions with Ellen earlier, like chicken and egg between the producer and the consumer about what's luxury. Well, Toby didn't really think about creating a luxury wine, but he wanted to make the best wine he could, again, to go all in. But when it came to selling his wine, he wanted to know how luxury brands in every kind of sector, what differentiate them, like that, those beacon of lights, those leaders, as you described, Maggie. And what he found, so he studied luxury brands in all kind of sectors. And what he found is that they always have three things in common, which is certainty and clarity, because successful luxury brands, they know themselves, they know their stories. You've mentioned that, they know who they are, their DNA. They also talk about emotions and not about the product, because they know who they are, they know what kind of emotion they can provoke in the consumer. And the last thing is storytelling, again, tying to what you said, is that whatever the industry, whatever the sector, because we don't really like industry at that stage, but they are master storytellers because they know themselves. And that ties in with social media beautifully, because if you know this, if you've got your basics, those solid basics, then you can express social media. You can go to social media because you've got clarity in your message, you know what emotion you want to provoke and you want to share, and you know your storytelling. So that all ties in.
It's very interesting because you have mentioned some of the characteristics that you find in a luxury brand that can be adopted in a way by wines, and the wine industry can adopt some of these characteristics, which is great and will facilitate even the connection with the consumers. But there are many other characteristics in a luxury brand building that are very difficult for wine business, because we don't handle our distribution. They have their own stores. We don't have it. We don't know our consumers. There are many things in the chain, in value chain. We don't control the value chain. We depend on nature, you see? So there are major differences in the way a luxury brand is built and in a way greatest wines are built. But no doubt that there are characteristics in the luxury brands that can be inspiring for the greatest wine or the luxury wines, you name it as you wish. But I think it's very interesting to learn that we need simplicity. We need to communicate with easy messages, and we have to connect with ourselves. And all of these houses, so many winemakers that produce, and they just have such a stories of their life connected to what they have produced, and they just come and talk all about techniques, and you feel that all wines are the same. It's very bad. It's really bad, and it really disconnects this bottle from what consumers are looking for. So it's very interesting. I think we can learn from those brands.
I have thank you. I have two questions that I'm going to actually bring together because they're covering the same sort of point, I think. One is from Kathy saying that, well, I mentioned Screaming Eagle, you mentioned Romani Conti, both are effectively unavailable because of the small quantities that exist, whereas Krug or Dom Perignon are more widely available if you are willing to pay. Very different definitions of luxury, which is correct. And Lorenzo Biscontin, who's a very well-regarded consultant in Italy, he said one of the connotations of luxury has always been exclusivity. What do you think of the concept of inclusivity introduced by Gucci? So how do you see those two?
Of course, and you see it by Vuitton, and you see it by Hermes, and they have all produced small things that give you access to this universe. If you go more and more to all these great names, first of all, nobody asks you for your passport or your pocket money to go into one of these stores. If you want to go into a store, you can go. The store is open for you. If you want to go, if you want to see the universe, you are not stopped by anyone. And then you can buy small things that allow these houses to invite you to their universe. And if you do a parallel, this is what we do when we invite people by the glass. When you have a by the glass in a wine or in a champagne, you are inviting consumers to come into your universe. You know, it's not so different. So I believe that luxury has to be generous. And the more exclusive you want to go, the further you want to go, the more people can forget you. So we have to be very careful in balancing properly this kind of exclusivity. Exclusivity, you know, it's more created by the fact that demand is very high and probably you have difficulty to access it, but it can never be an attitude from the house. From the house, you always want to be open and generous. And then you have your price because you have your cost, because you have your structure, because you have your rarity, because, you know, every house. But the attitude of exclusivity, I remember one day, very many years ago, that was this idea that Krug was for connoisseurs. You know, that I completely hate this idea. Because who is going to decide who is a connoisseur? You know, and I said to this journalist, I said, you are going to decide if the person is a connoisseur or not? You know, I love opera, and I am far from being a connoisseur of opera. And I would hate somebody to tell me, you cannot listen to opera because you don't really you are not a connoisseur in opera. Who is who to define who is a connoisseur or not? And so we have to be very careful with all this exclusivity and this attitude, because it ends being arrogancy, and arrogancy you pay very expensive. And if you are luxury, you cannot be arrogant.
And so again, to tie in with what Eric Asimov said and his remarks, sorry he can't be here, so he asked me to prompt some little things, but for him there was a big difference between exclusivity and accessibility, and people shouldn't mix the two notions. It's not because you are inclusive that you can be accessible, and that ties in with your attitude. Yeah. So a house have to be inclusive, but it doesn't mean that it can or should be accessible everywhere, and that doesn't mean that it's exclusive. So again,
I would say that you're exclusive if you decide, well, this kind of people will not have this is exclusivity. You decide this is for some group. No, and I disagree with this. And I would like to know which is the luxury brand that has been successful, that has been exclusive in this way. No. They are open. They are in many countries in the world. People who want to buy it. And you see, like, I always remember this story that I found interesting. And young women in Japan, when they make their money, they save so they can buy a Vuitton bag. And the Vuitton bag says, I'm independent. I make my money. You see, who is who to judge this? So I think it's very interesting, and it can take different forms. But for me, the key is the attitude. An attitude in wine, in luxury brands, in whatever, has to always be generous. If you want to create a great product, you create a great product for those who want to appreciate it. And it is not to you to decide who will. See, this is for me extremely important.
There's an interesting conversation happening in the chat right now that I think is worth getting into, where Ellen and Nicole and a few of us are having a bit of a conversation about the American perspective on luxury and fine. Of course, Eric comes from that model as well, and inclusivity and accessibility. And I almost wonder if there is a bit of self-consciousness or self-awareness to it, in that, so what's just been said on the chat is that you will have, and I'm going to be very politically incorrect with some of my language here, you have this thing that happens where, like, brownies will call themselves fancy or luxury or stuff like that, where, you know, back in the 1970s, you had ads in America for genuine faux diamels that were trying to make themselves more important than they were. So you have this wellspring of brands who are trying to adopt the language of luxury. And then what you have is this self-awareness in luxury brands that are trying to say, we are not comfortable with this language of luxury. We just want to say that we're the best at what we do. We're great. We're fine. So it's actually at odds with one another. How do you continue to differentiate yourself in a world where other people who are not as great or not as fine are trying to co-opt your language?
Well, because I believe one characteristic that a luxury house or a luxury brand must have is that, and we go back to, you are the light that enlightens the path for others. You know, you don't see around to see what others are doing, but you have to the responsibility of keep being in front. So if you keep moving because you are not complacent and because you question yourself all the time, and because there is no way that you stop and you say, I'm successful, you will never have this problem. You have this problem when you stop. And you stop and then you're copied, and then you turn and somebody's doing this exactly what you're doing. But if you keep moving ahead, which is your responsibility, when you decide that you are in front, you see, you would, I mean, the others will be always behind. And for me, this isn't, you shouldn't even care about this. And one thing that has, when you are truly luxury, and unfortunately this word has been so badly damaged, but let's take out of all this external damage to it, you really, you're not a category, you are on your own, and you have your own responsibility, and you move in your own direction. And so if somebody copies you, okay, you must be happy because you did something good. And at the end, if somebody copies you and it's going to get better, and you think somebody is going to claim being very good, and consumers are stupid, consumers are not stupid. So if you tell me this is very good and it is not, consumers will reject it. And you know, I have always thought in every position I had in my life, and there's a while now because I've been working for 42 years, leading many companies in different sectors in different countries, I always said, I always want to consider my consumer as brilliant. So never underestimate your consumers. And I think this is absolutely critical for anyone. Doesn't have to be luxury or not luxury or whatever, okay? Is never think consumers are stupid. Always think consumers are brilliant, and you will never get it wrong, you see. And so if you're very good and you claim to be very good, I think it's not for anyone to claim they are very good. If you're very good, you let others tell you you are very good. But if you are using the vocabulary of somebody else and you're not good, you're going to fail finally. And so who cares?
What are your inspiration when you lead the way as you do, and when you always, you know, rethinking about what you can do, never be complacent, always moving forward, and always, I mean, knowing your consumer, because, you know, you want them, you think they're brilliant. Where do you get your inspiration from to always keep moving?
You get your inspiration because, you know, I think it's because you question yourself, you're always open, you listen, it's absolutely critical, read a lot, go out, listen to people, in connection with people. You know, for me, since I am the president of companies, I have always gone in the market to animate dinners, events. Why? Because this is the way I get in contact with the consumers. Because we don't control our distribution and we're very far, for me, it has always been critical to be in the market animating. When I animate, I know my customers, the client that may be distributed by our intermediate companies, like Moet Hennessy is an intermediate company that distributes our brands. So the way for me to know the clients and the way for me to know the consumers is by going in the market, activating, animating, and this helps me to listen to them, to listen what, you know, they are expecting, to understand what their concerns are. And then, you know, all of these things will keep you moving. Like, you know, for me, it was evident that a house like Krug must be good to the world and must take care of the planet. And since for 4 years, because LVMH had only one foundation, that was Louis Vuitton Foundation, but I fought, and we finally got the approval to create a fund. And so we have a fund that is called K for Music. And it's investing today in all the research about the connection between tasting and hearing to give to the world, because I think there must be something that comes out that can help the world, and in education, and we invest in culture. And so, and on the other side, we are in this program of Living Soils, you know, understanding our terroir. We are bringing all our growers together to get certified because they are small and they don't have the money to do it. So I think you have to be committed, to listen to people, and to take your house in whichever level it is to the top of it, you know, and deliver. Always try to over-deliver. This is,
Maggie,
for me, the critical point.
thank you. Maggie, can I just say that the one thing we haven't talked about, and I'm conscious we're quite near the end, and we are called the real business of wine. The elephant in the room, in the luxury room, is money. And to me, to do the best thing, to make something that's really great every year, you need to be able to charge enough for it, which means a margin. If you make that margin, you can tell people what you're doing. And as you've just said, you can do good. One of the problems to me of the wine world, which champagne is separate from, within the champagne world, there is a history, because as you said, because we have brands, we have negotiation, of margin building. If we go into the rest of the wine world, even in regions like Barolo and Brunello and Burgundy and other places, there's always somebody who is making something with the same village name as you are for less money. And it's sitting on the same shelf. And you're always struggling against that, unless you are lucky enough to have inherited some prestige. And to me, the new world has been easier. The new world has allowed people like Bill Harlan to create brands. But in the old world, to actually have that commitment is not that simple.
No, and you need, you know, specific terroirs with, you know, special quality, but you can have growers, you know, like Cécile Tremblay. And Cécile, you know, she has full attitude towards what she produces. And finally, what happens is she creates great wines and people tell others, and this is something very strong from the social media. All this, the word of mouth goes so fast and is so much stronger. So this also gives an opportunity for those growers who are passionate about what they do, are committed to create great products, for the world to know about it, you know. So I think it is true, but it is also true that what in the world of wines, and this applies also to champagne, with the benefit that we say that champagne can grow probably a little further because of the way of making champagne. But the truth is, in both cases, is coherence and consistency in time, you see? And this is extremely important. This may apply to luxury brands, but we have to remember that we are in a value chain that we do not control, because we are connected to nature, you see? And so this commitment that says, you know, this year, I cannot produce more than 1,000 bottles. This year, I cannot produce anything. You know, that for me is critical for a great wine producer. And it's a decision of everyone. And at the same time, when we go into wine, is a very, very long-term commitment. I cannot imagine wine, but in the very, very long-term commitment. And it's nothing to do with the times of luxury brands.
Polly, you've got two questions from the floor, haven't you?
I know that we're at time, so I just wanted to ask a couple really good questions from the audience. The first one is how, like Formula E cars or like haute couture, you know, we have you as innovators leading the way, setting standards. How can we see the impact of your knowledge, your changes, your innovation trickle down through from luxury to, you know, everyday, easily accessible, non-exclusive consumer products? We'll go with that one first.
I would like to say to you, it's very interesting what luxury brands, and we move now into the luxury brand worlds, can do, and what is the responsibility. When you have strong luxury brands, let's take all the leather goods, because it's quite mature industry, and you have this kind of leading houses. These leading houses they have inspired other houses. So what you see today compared to 20 years ago It's an industry that is much nicer. All the stores, higher and lower end, they are much nicer. The products are much nicer. So at the end, probably that house is not so accessible, but it has benefited the other layers. So I think that when you are at the very top, and this is why generosity is fundamental, and giving is critical. And this is what I say always in Krug. I want to give all I know. We are now studying the terroir, going in understanding every little plot, but with the idea of giving this information to the Champagne region, so they can use it for it getting better. You see, for me, it's and this is very connected to what we said before. What is if other follows? It's perfect. You keep going. You have to keep improving. And this is, for me, the competition that is the best competition. You keep moving, you have this responsibility, and others will follow you. And this is fantastic. And it's fantastic to be able to give to others for others to be better. And if you don't move, you will be killed. And if you get moving, you will continue to inspire. And this is why, if you want to be luxury in the pure expression of this word, you have to make sure you keep this lightening the path for others.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, which I'm going to let Pauline lead the way on, because I know this was one of your questions tonight.
I had one question. Well, it was more of thinking, you know, we've been talking about connecting, we've been talking about you going around, spreading the message, taking the temperature, listening. In the situation that we are now, that might last another, 12, 18 months, where we can't really travel. So most of our connection will have to be digital. How does the house group pivot? How do you personally pivot? And do you think that was the final maybe conclusion is human connection going to be the next luxury? Because finally being able to see each other face to face, is that going to be the future ultimate luxury?
Well, I would say that there is nothing that can replace the physical connection. And when life will give us the opportunity to see, and I am almost going to cry, but when you can see together, you will enjoy so much. You will value so much the possibility of embracing people you love. But what is interesting, and for me was an evidence when I started seeing the impact of this epidemic. For me, it was evident that we were moving into a very digitalized world. And so we started very early, at the end of February. I asked the team, and the team moved so fast, and we created a menu of different options. And we serve our markets and our clients and the clients of our clients. And we do all sorts of things. We do cocktails, we do masterclasses, we do virtual tastings, we do with the press, with people. I was on Sunday with a group of friends in Florida. And so it is difficult, yes, because we cannot do the same things we used to do before. But it's very interesting because all our habits had to change so fast. So we learned that there is nothing that cannot be changed. And I think this is fabulous. And so because I'm a very positive person, I think that this is teaching us lots of things. And you see, when I was the other day describing Krug to 160 sommeliers in Argentina, and it was so great. And they were observing, and then they could ask, and all doubts were clarified. And we had made a connection with 160 people at once. Wow, we would have never imagined doing this 2 months ago, you see. And I think there is benefit, goods and bads in everything. And we have to take the positive of this, and we have to understand that at the end, we will have both, because we have also reconnected with old friends and students we had not connected in years. And one day we will see them and we will embrace them. And then we will have the best of both. So this is the way I see what we are going through. And we have to be positive. It's not going to be easy. tough times for the wine, tough times for champagne, because our reason of being is for sharing. And so I always say that we've been threatened in what we are for, in our reason of being. So how can we just invite people to share it among themselves and be those who can incentivize and create the opportunities for people to enjoy and discover. And it's going to be tough and not as easy as it was before, but we will learn, and at the end, we will have both.
Thank you so much.
There are so many questions, and we could actually continue this conversation for another 3 or 4 hours, I know. And Maggie, I have been privileged and lucky enough to have been in the audience. We've met several times, but I've been in the audience several times, and hearing you share your experience and your knowledge with such generosity. You've started so many thoughts in so many minds this evening, and I'm sure there are lots of people who'd like to go off and write their own PhDs on their own versions of on the roads you've set them on. And I think that's a brilliant thing to have done. So thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing with such generosity. Thank you, Pauline and Nicole Rollet of ARENI Global for helping to bring this evening together. Thank you, Polly Hammond, as ever, my partner in crime on these projects. Tomorrow night, we're looking at virtual tastings. The whole new thing which we're just talking about. And the night after, we're doing something completely different. We're going to look at India, one of the emerging markets, which has been a slowly emerging market, but I think one that is becoming quite interesting now, both in terms of consumption and for Krug included, and indeed production. So come back and see us for those. Please, you're going to watch this on YouTube, because there is so much, if you listen to what Maggie was saying, there is so many things between the lines of what you're saying to ponder over. So thank you all very much. Stay safe.
Thank you for everyone. Thank you everyone for your nice, kind messages, and thank you, Pauline, for this invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pauline.
And be safe.
Bye.
Yes, you too.
Bye.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.